Hello, welcome to Chapter 3 Podcast, the show for readers of science fiction, fantasy, and romance. This is Season 2, Episode 13. Today, we are going to be talking about a fantasy book that has been everywhere lately, I feel like, Jade City by Fonda Lee. And joining us is YouTuber and podcaster Mara from Books Like Whoa and Changeling Cast. So we're so happy to have you on.
Thanks for having me. It's been a while. I don't think I've been here since you guys since season 2 happened.
I think so, yeah. Since we have video, I have Leanna's a co-host.
Should we have done a previously on Chapter 3 podcast for Mara?
Yeah, where am I coming in? What was the last discussion about,
I am, as always, the villain.
Love with Brandon Sanderson, or what's happening?
We're talking First Law. Shocker, I know.
That was the only way that I could have a redemption arc, is that we could switch to talking about First Law.
If you want to introduce yourself briefly, and we'll have links to where people can find you in the show notes.
Sure. So my name is Mara. I am a YouTuber and podcaster, as Bethany said. I read a little bit of everything. I think I'm known for mystery, classics, and romance, I'd say, are kind of my ones a lot of people know me for. But I'm also a big fantasy reader, especially sort of like fantasy plus another genre or sci-fi plus another genre. Leanna has been my willing ? Co-pilot for a number of buddy reads over the years. I mean, Bethany as well, but I feel like me and Leanna have really been going the distance in the last couple of years on
with
Hob and
group for Hob.
Yeah, exactly. We've got Hob going. We read Jade City together, which is why I'm here. I don't know. Recently, in the last couple of years, we just seem to randomly have books on our TBRs at the same time. So
it's like period syncing, but bookish.
Right. It's like kind of like that.
Book menstrual cycles. Apparently, me and Leanna are living in the same bookish sorority house. And it's
apparently
girls who bleed together read together.
Oh my gosh, that should be your new merch.
You should make that merch. That would be hilarious, actually.
I feel like
we do Chapter 3 podcast. Come on.
This is like no one
or for Chapter 3 podcast. Yeah, we could totally actually that would be really
interesting.
That would be good. We'll have to think about that. Okay, so we're gonna talk Jade City, and I feel like it's gonna be interesting because the three of us all have had semi different opinions and experiences with this book that, at least on BookTube, has been wildly popular. So I think I liked it the least of everybody, and I think Leanna liked it the most.
I think that's safe.
Shock, horror.
I mean,
because the other thing is, so the three of us are also in book club together.
Mm-hmm.
We do the Blades and Boughs Ripper book club once a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, I don't know that we've had a book that all of us agreed on in a long time, but usually Leanna is the one who's like suffering in the corner with whatever your Bethany or Amanda have made her read. So for her,
I don't even like the books that I pick.
I know. It's true.
That's true. That is true. She doesn't even like her own picks, so we can't feel too bad. But yeah, this is exciting that she's the most positive on this one.
Yeah.
It's a massive relief to like have a hyped series that for once I'm not like, so guys, I didn't like it. For once to be like, oh, it's so good. I'm totally on the hype train. It's so nice.
I love it. You can finally be excited. I felt so terrible when I was not a fan of it because everybody I knew seemed to love it. And it has, I should let everyone know, it's been a while since I've read it. When we decided to do this episode, I was like, I think I remember enough to talk a little bit about it, but it's been like a year. So I was looking at my review from a year ago. Yeah, I mean, and I didn't dislike it, I guess I should say. It just really wasn't my cup of tea, but maybe we could go around and kind of, if people want to share.
Well,
what
did
you think?
Did anyone do it on audio?
I did.
Okay, because I didn't. So then I wonder, because I often, wonder like, because I know like with
I did like a blended read, so I like read physically and listened to some of the audiobook, but yeah, I thought the audio narrator was fine.
Because I know for like City of Brass that I don't really, it's another one that's hyped and I don't like it more than usual. But I do know that for the majority of people that I've talked to who love it, all did it on audio, and I didn't do it on audio. So like sometimes like that can make or break something depending.
That's true. I kind of think with Jade City, for me, it's more just that it's not my thing. Like I was like, okay, objectively this is pretty well executed. I can see why people love it. I am just not like, I don't really like mafia stories very much. And
That's like
Well,
literally what
I'm
this
I'm
is.
an
that's
enjoyer of
basically what this is.
yeah, this is 1000% mafia,
Yeah.
and I am an enjoyer of a trashy mafia romance, so
And I am
I
not.
was I was, you know, primed from my reading of Mink and other Kindle Unlimited smut to be into this.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say, I'm guessing in Bethany's case, aside from just it being hyped, knowing that it would be this type of story, you probably went into it thinking like, I hope I like this, but I probably won't.
Pretty much. I mean, I kind of went into it thinking, well, honestly, I probably wouldn't have picked it up except that so many people with different kinds of reading taste who I am friends with liked it and told me I should read it. And so I finally was like, okay, it doesn't sound like my thing, but I'm going to try it. And sure enough, it was indeed not my thing.
But, you
You're
know, I think that that's, like, a really important spirit to keep in your reading is, like, an
Mhm.
openness to being surprised, because
Yeah.
sometimes I'll pick something up from, like, book club or just it is so hyped that I'm like, "Okay, I kinda wanna just see if I'll like this," and a lot of times it doesn't work out, but sometimes you're surprised, and then you find something that you would never have picked up for yourself, but,
I was gonna
you
see
know?
you forcibly keep that spirit in me alive with book club. Like I'm
We
always
try.
forced out of my
We
comfort
try,
zone.
Leanna. We try.
Well, you
Yeah.
know, we're just trying to torture you at this point, so it's not even trying to keep that spirit alive, it's mostly just trying to inflict pain upon you.
Oh, no.
So nice, so nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree though. I think it's good to sometimes get out your side your comfort zone and try something that you're not sure how you're gonna do with it and see. And I gave it 3 stars. So it's not like
Yeah, you didn't
I
hate it,
disliked
just
I didn't hate it. I just was like, "Hmm." And I mean, I do have
so
specific things that didn't work for me, but which we can get into, but
Also, I
yeah.
mean, so obviously, like, there's the mafia thing, but so I'm guessing since you gave it 3 stars and you don't like
Mhm.
mafia stories, that
Yeah.
like your experience with this book wasn't that like there's nothing wrong with the book. I don't like this kind of story. It's not where like, oh, this book specifically did things badly. It's just like, yeah, I'm just not into. It's like a romance book
Right.
for me where I'm like, I guess people like this, but like, I don't really want to read about this.
I mean, pretty much. I mean, there were a few things that I was like, "Okay, I didn't love this specific thing," but for the most part, I was just like, I'm not
Ooh,
invested.
how are we handling spoilers this fine podcast?
Um,
oh, that's a good point.
yeah, why don't we do spoiler free for the first little while, and then we'll do spoilers?
Maybe you guys can put, like, a time jump or something in the show notes letting people know when they can come back if they don't want spoilers.
Yeah, I can do that.
Leanna, so you love this. What at a high level did you love about it? And
Well,
insert just a gif of Hilo right here.
so there's also the fact that like the exact opposite of Bethany, that I'm primed to like this because I like gangster mafia criminal type stories. Like I like heist stories, I like adult and or high fantasy. Doesn't really do this kind of thing. And we kind of talked about this, you and me, Mara, about expectations of it being a urban fantasy, because like it is an urban environment and it is a fantasy, but it doesn't really like go with urban fantasy the way that the tropes are established in what that is. And so like I don't really read urban fantasy, which is I guess where you would find like you don't really have mafia in medieval style fantasy. Like that's just like not a thing. So I when I have enjoyed and consumed criminal mafia type stories, it's usually in film and television, and it's usually like historical, not fantasy. So like that type of story has always appealed to me, but I've not had much opportunity to read it since I mainly read fantasy. So having a high fantasy, adult fantasy that is doing mafia things, gangster things, is like the meeting, the colliding of my favorite worlds, like adult, grimdarkish kind of fantasy and gangsters. It's like, of course I love this.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I kind of fall in between you guys because I enjoyed this. I thought it was good. Like, I don't necessarily have a lot of critiques for it. I don't think that, like, emotionally this connected with me the way it did with Leanna, and just in terms of, like, "Ooh, I love this." Like, it didn't hit my, like, "Ooh, I love this" button. So I would give this, like, a 4 star, which for me is, like, an A minus. Like, I enjoyed this. I'll keep going in the series at some point. I do really love urban fantasy. Like, that is one of my favorite kinds of fantasy. So it was fun to me to get just kind of a different take on those tropes, like, because it really is more epic fantasy tropes kind of imported into an urban fantasy kind of setup. So I don't know that I've read something quite like this before, which I thought was cool. I think I wonder, Bethany, if you'll agree with me on this, but I think I would have liked more character development
Yeah, I think
that probably is what kept me from just like, by the end, I was really
Which
connecting with Hilo and Shay and
Mhm.
Win. But towards the beginning, it took a long time for me to really get in with the characters.
But so you saying that about character development, like I would tend to when people talk about character development, that tends to be something that like quote unquote slows down your plot, you know, if you're stopping to delve with characters. And
Yeah.
interestingly, like I've heard people who don't love Jade City express that they think it's too slow. And that you wanted more character development, in which case, if she had done more character development, it would have been even slower in air
People think
quotes.
it's too
I
slow?
know. When I heard that, I was
Well,
like,
I
I thought
kind
it was a
of
mile a
agree with
minute,
that.
but
I kind of agree with that. Like, I found it weirdly both slow, but also not super plot driven. Like, but also
Yeah.
not. It was a weird. The pacing
I
I
guess
did
there's a
find
lot of I
weird.
guess there's a lot of world stuff happening and, like, political
Yeah,
machination stuff happening, so that's a
yeah.
lot of the focus. I think part of my struggle is that the only character I really liked or cared at all about was Shay, but I did not like where her plot arc went. And so it kinda lost me by the end because I was like, "Okay, the one character I was rooting for, and then you do this," and I'm like, "Mm."
Oh, see, I really liked where Shay's character. I was like wanting more of her, and then like where it ended up, I was like, oh, cool. Okay, so in the next books, I'm gonna get a lot more with her. So this is great.
so this is for viewers, not for my co-hosts who have never seen Peaky Blinders, which is I still don't understand how you've never even heard of Peaky Blinders.
I
Me
watched
and
But anyway,
Leanna's
part of an
group, me,
episode.
our buddy read was basically just her sending me gifts of Peaky Blinders for like, I was at Trader Joe's shopping, and I like kept going like bing bing, and it was like, Peaky Blinders, Peaky Blinders.
but I mean, like a lot of this, the pacing of it, the presence or lack of character development, the types of characters that are in this, and specifically, like not just that, like, oh, they're gangsters. It's like specific character types and character dynamics that are in Peaky Blinders. Like literally, Shay is so much like Ada, who's like the sister of the family in Peaky Blinders. And like her plot arc is like, I mean, it's not identical, of course, and like there's no magical jade, and they are in Birmingham post World War One, so I mean, it's not modern Asia. Okay, that is different, but like the way that like her and or like where she's at when you start the show and how she gets roped into things is, you know, loosely very similar. So when I was watching her plot arc, I was like, yeah, like this is the Ada arc, so like I know where this is going.
Yeah, hopefully, listeners, that means more to you than it
Because
does
everyone in
to
the world has at least heard of Peaky Blinders except for you.
I had kind of heard of it, but you're the first person I know who like loves it.
Yeah,
So
I hadn't heard of it until I heard Leanna talking about it. But
Yeah.
also, it is totally not the kind of TV I would be aware of because I don't like mafia stuff. I don't really like historical fiction stuff, especially around World War stuff, like World War, like it's just not like if it was a fantasy show, I probably would have heard of it.
I don't really watch a lot of TV anymore, so it's just there's fewer opportunities for such things to come
Yeah.
across my eyeballs. So
Yeah.
I just like it's like so it's been on for quite some time and that like it's so sort of in the zeitgeist. Like I never watched The Sopranos, but like I know what The Sopranos is and I get most references to The Sopranos without ever having seen a single episode of it. And there was a long time before I saw The Godfather, but I got references to The Godfather. You know, like you don't have to have seen it or even like it to like know about it. And like there are again so many dudes getting Peaky Blinder style haircuts. There's so many like before even TikTok became a thing, I constantly saw like things on Instagram or whatever of like people making videos of them
but I wonder if
looking
that's
like
like everybody has their own internet. You
yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the algorithm you probably lingered over one of those haircut pictures for a little too long on Instagram, so it just started.
That's probably true.
I mean, I've been watching it since it came on. I just feel like and then like a
When
lot
did
of
it
people I know
start?
just like when I was shortly after I finished college, so like 2015 probably.
See, that's also probably part of it is because, like, my first baby was born in 2014, so I was in, like, early motherhood, like, that is probably the last thing I would have been aware of.
I was in grad school, so
Yeah, that explains a lot,
I was
actually.
broke and had no premium access television
Yeah.
in Canada. Also, we don't have TV in Canada, so
I mean, it's one of those this has just become a Peaky
Interesting.
Blinders cast, but like it started as a British show and then Netflix started co-funding it. So now it's like when you go on Netflix, it's like a Netflix original, even though it was like produced by the Brits. And then Netflix
Interesting.
started adding their money to it. Anyway, so
Jade
if you
City.
like,
Yeah,
but this is one of those where like if if it was blurbed, as like Peaky Blinders meets like Hong Kong martial arts films, I'd be like, correct.
Oh yeah, that's like the
very
trend thing we were
accurate.
talking about the other day, where like all books get blurbed with it's this meets this, or it's these tropes, and it's like, yeah, this would be it's Peaky Blinders meets K-pop or like K-dramas. That's kind of, I think,
And martial arts films. Yeah.
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 Like yeah.
It's interesting how like I do wonder, because I know on BookTube it's so popular, and I wonder a little bit like, is it really popular outside of that? I can't tell. Maybe it is.
Well, it did also win the World Fantasy Award.
I mean, that's something, yeah.
That's something.
And it's being adapted by Peacock.
Okay. Peacock is picking up all kinds of things lately, it seems like.
They're trying,
I think the announcement
happen over at Peacock.
I think the announcement of them picking it up was like not long after it came out. Like they snapped it up right away.
Yeah. Interesting.
Hey, if they'll make like a side Changeling adaptation, then they can just keep snapping things up. But.
Yeah. So I do think that the Jade magic world building stuff is kind of cool. However, one thing that I think this book made me realize, and this is not like you shouldn't do this. This is just a like personal preference thing.
You shouldn't do this if you want Bethany to read your book.
Which is clearly what matters to no.
Fonda Lee is in your DMs every day.
Know,
like, Bethany,
really
what can I do?
Like, what can I do to make this the book for you? Yeah.
How can I make this right?
No, I'm so happy for everyone who loves it. But I think this book made me realize that I don't enjoy reading fantasy where magic is used as a stand-in for addiction. Like, I just don't enjoy that trope. I don't think it's that it's a bad trope. It's not
that this
enjoyable.
Is again like trying to stay on topic.
Yeah.
Briefly off topic. That is definitely a thing in the Farseer trilogy. And I know you like the Farseer trilogy.
Oh, yeah, that is true.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's not like my favorite part of the Farseer trilogy.
Well, I definitely think there's books where, well, I guess it's not magic. It's more speculative science stuff, but inside Changeling, which I know you like, that gets used as a metaphor quite a bit.
Yeah, I think I'm fine with it if there's enough other things in the book that I'm really into. Yeah. But it's not my preferred trope of magic, and I think the reason it stood out to me in this book was because there wasn't other stuff to really distract me from it, if that makes sense.
It was very a focal point of the plot.
Yeah, and so I think because of that, I was like, I don't enjoy this very much. So.
Well, I will say, I think something I told Leanna, and I will say, I wonder if some of my enjoyment of this was hampered by the fact that I had just finished Ship of Destiny a week or two before I read this, was that I do think Robin Hobb deals with some similar themes around how magic can corrupt, but she just does it so much better. But I don't know that that's like a fair Robin Hobb is literally one of the masters of the genre. That would be like being, comparing someone to William Makepeace Thackeray or something for literary fiction. I don't know. Just like, it's not probably a fair comparison, but I do think that some of the Jade stuff was a little on the nose for me. Like, that's probably one of the critiques I have, is I don't know that there was a lot of like subtlety to it, which I probably would have enjoyed. But I mean, I do think it opens up some interesting discussions about like the economy and how access to certain resources from the different classes impacts people's lives, as well as, I was talking with Leanna, it made me think a lot about how like older generations gatekeep things for younger generations in terms of like setting them up for success. Like, I thought some of the Jade stuff played into then the specific family dynamics within No Peak. So like, I think that there were some interesting things about it as a world setup, but I did feel like it was a little heavy-handed at times.
Well, I feel like when I started it, I was pretty like hooked, like from the beginning. I know, like when I read The Name of the Wind, I wasn't very far into it when I was like, okay, I know already this is like one of the best books I've ever read, because like 50 pages of nothing went by and I'm just like drooling. So I was like, I know, this is amazing. So like Jade City, I was like, okay, like I think I'm into this. So like that's a relief. So okay, all right, this is cool. I'm interested. And like the Jade stuff and the gang setup, I was like, I mean, like it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty like, okay, Jade is how I get it, how it works. And it's like, it is currency, it is drugs. Like, I get what we're doing here. And like, okay, it's a vibe. It's fine. And there were things about the characters individually, which like, I don't want to say like super specific stuff, but just like who they are within the story, who they seem to be within the hierarchy, how the government seems to work, how a lot of things, like how the magic works, how the economy works, how a lot of things would work. That like as we were introduced to it, I was like, okay, like I have no issues with that. Like it's not like the most amazing, incredible thing I've ever seen. But yeah, that's fine. That's fine. And then a lot of things, she did take them in more interesting places than initially it seemed. So like the way that she like slowly complicated some of those things. Their very first introduction to drugs besides Jade is like, okay, that's something. And then even further, how that's further complicated once that's introduced and what happens in your understanding of it from different perspectives. I was like, okay, I'm quite liking that. That's a lot more nuanced than it seemed at first. And the same thing with like the politics and the like the relationship between non-gang members and gang members and the government, and like all of that slowly got more and more actually nuanced. Then I was like, okay, this is actually quite good.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I should note, I'm only judging the first book, so like I'm guessing that this goes more interesting and nuanced places as the story goes on, because I also believe, well, I don't think this is a spoiler. I don't think this is a spoiler. I think that in the future books, a lot more time passes than what passes in this book. So I think that also probably means that there's going to be more room for things to go in a lot of different directions
And
with.
there are a lot of things that are introduced and not paid off. I don't feel like I was let down in some way. It just seems like, okay, like I see a lot of threads you've left open, things you want me to start thinking about or start being aware of that are probably going to, mature into a big problem in later books.
Yeah, like I actually, the way that this book ends, again, not spoiling, but just the setup of the book, for me, if the story had started there-ish, I probably would have really flown through things a lot faster, because it ended where I was like, yes, okay, this is really what I'm interested in.
Like, I feel like usually when people say the first book feels like setup, feels like a prologue, I feel like that's quite a harsh criticism sometimes. I wouldn't quite go that far with Jade City, but to some degree, it does feel like by the end point, you're like, okay, we've reached, this is where
Yeah.
we're going from here.
I don't mean it as a criticism, because sometimes, yes, I mean, like, good Lord, why does this book exist? This really should have just been a prologue. And that's not what I mean. I just mean that, like, we were really getting into the meat of what I enjoyed about the book at the end of it. I still understand why the rest of the book happened, and knowing now what I've heard about the way that the next books are structured, I think it makes sense for her to do what she did. I'm trying not to spoil anything. But yeah, it was just by the end of it, I was finally like, okay, yes, like I like where all these characters are on the chessboard. Like I'm into this. I'm excited to see where we're going to go from here.
Bethany did not feel any of these ways.
I did not, but I mean, I respect that. I think for me, I got to the end of it and I was kind of like, well, the one character I liked is now in a place that I don't like, and everybody is horrible, so I don't really root for anyone. Why do I care? Like that was kind of how I
Bethany,
felt.
you read First Law.
Yeah, but it has a bigger project that's interesting to me, and it's and there are characters that I love. Like that's the thing. Like First
Actually,
Law,
I think that is an interesting like counterpoint. I think there is a big difference between First Law, where it's clear that you are not meant to like these characters. Like,
Yeah.
and you don't feel like this doesn't work for me because I don't like them. You're like, okay, but there's probably something wrong with you if you do like them. Like that's not what we're doing here. Whereas Jade City, like they are unlikable, but you are meant to
But
like
I feel
them.
like you're supposed to like them, and
That's what I mean.
don't.
But I mean, they're written as gray
Yeah.
and morally gray, but not in a way where like morally gray in First Law is like, I'm meant to think that you're interesting and awful. I'm meant to
Right.
think that you were like morally gray in Jade City, but like I'm meant to root for you.
Yes.
Yeah, you're meant to be rooting for them, and I'm kind of on the fence on some of them, but towards the end, like Hilo, I guess in particular, I felt like the ending of the book really got me more hooked into him and rooting for him more, because I felt like I liked where his character arc was going, and then positionally in terms of like what Shay is doing, I was more interested in like what her plot setup for the next book is going to be. I'm like,
Yeah.
ooh, okay, this is juicy.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Well, also like
see
when
that.
I was like saying all the like the Jade being a little more complicated later on, and the politics being a little more complicated later on. Hilo, like seems when you first like get introduced to the story, you're like, okay, I know that character. Like, I mean, he's cool, whatever. But like he as a character becomes more complicated later on in the book. He's not that two-dimensional.
Yeah. I think the difference for me is that with First Law, what pulled me through the first time I read it was that I loved Glokta, I found Giselle entertaining, and I cared about the project of the series. Like those three things were what made me want to keep reading. I think that's the thing is that like for me, there's got to be something or like either a character that I really love or like something that's really sucking me in. And that's I think for that was this is why it was a 3-star read for me. I'm like, a lot of this was done well. I can see why people love it. It's just the problem is I don't care enough about any of the characters. I don't like this kind of political machinations. Like the mafia gangster story isn't really my cup of tea. I'm not loving the way she's doing like the magic as addiction. Like that's not really my thing either. So there just wasn't anything that I liked
No
enough.
place for you to like really get your
Yeah,
claws in there
exactly.
and be like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
invested.
I feel like from my extremely scientific research and surveys of like just people I know, I feel like the make or break of Jade City, like whether or not it's gonna work for you or not, is do you like Hilo? Because like for the
Yeah,
most part,
I didn't like
people
Hilo.
people who I've heard don't like Jade City will be like, and I don't like Hilo.
Well,
that's like if he doesn't work for you.
So one thing I said to Leanna, and then I was trying to, like, while I was doing work today, I was trying to watch some reviews in the background to refresh me on things that happened in this book because, you know, I have the memory of a goldfish. I was watching Elle's review, and Elle agrees with me that she wanted points of view from the other family. And I think that now I'm not trying to like Monday morning quarterback Fonda Lee, she can do whatever she wants. But I think that possibly could have been something to get me more hooked in is if we see both sides and rooting for both sides and making that more of like a complicated emotional investment for the reader. Like I'm not saying you would have liked it, Bethany, but I wonder if you would have if that would have been a more interesting experience for you to be like, oh, I'm like, I like Shay and I'm kind of rooting for her.
But who do I root for? I could see, I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, I could see that working better, potentially. I mean, I don't know that it would still be my favorite thing, but I would
No,
agree.
but I just wonder if it's like, if you don't like Hilo and you're supposed to be like rooting for No Peak, I wonder if like a way around that could be.
That's also probably why it's not written that way, is because this is a book where you're supposed to root for these characters and you're on team No Peak.
Yeah, whereas I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, y'all kind of suck. You like let a pedophile get away with things for years and years. Burn it down, you know?
I was gonna say, so shall we dive into spoilers?
Sure. Yeah, are there any other non-spoilery things we can say?
I mean, I think non-spoiler, I do genuinely think, like, I would be truly shocked if you were a huge fan of Peaky Blinders and you hated Jade City. I think if you like that show, you're gonna like Jade City.
And I think it's worth trying, even if you don't end up liking it, because I do feel like it's pretty different. I'm happy to say, actually, not just that it's a non-basic bitch medieval fantasy, because we actually have a lot of those now, and we even have a lot of Asian-inspired fantasy. I've been realizing recently that I really like Asian-inspired fantasy. There's plenty of that, but I think it's different in the sense of it's kind of unique tropes in the type of fantasy that
the very modern setting.
Yeah, like it's an interesting blend of kind of bits and pieces. So I don't know that I've read a book quite like it. So I think it's worth trying just purely from this is just something a little different.
It's an interesting fusion on every level. It's a fusion of genre, it's a fusion of cultures, it's a fusion of like narrative styles. It's just like a, you know, Heinz 57 of things Fonda Lee likes. So
which I kind of love. I wish more writers would just be like, these are all the things I like in one, because you can feel their passion for, you know, what they're doing, I think, a little more. Yeah. So are we officially talking about spoilers?
Let's do spoilers.
Okay. I will say when this book went, because I was sort of like, I like this. This is kind of like a 3.5, maybe a 4. I don't know. When Lon dies, I'm like, okay. That was a ballsy move midway through. Like, I didn't see that coming as what was going to happen.
I saw that coming. I saw that as a thing that would happen at the end of the book. Like, that he would be dead by the end of the book. I could have seen it as like, oh, in the big, whatever big confrontation there ends up being as the final climax, he dies and Hilo has to take over. I thought that was a ballsy move to clearly be setting him up, we think, as one of our main characters. And he is, I guess, but then yeah, so like, I feel like him dying, not a surprise. Him dying midway,
when he died, yeah.
Yeah.
And I do like what that brings out of Hilo, because I think he becomes more like, you kind of see that he is a little bit of a marshmallow for his family at the end of the day. And I particularly felt that at the end of the book with like the little what's the little brother's name?
Andon?
The adopted, what?
Andon?
Andon, yeah. When Andon, what Hilo sees as betrays him, I really believed at that point that he has this emotional investment in his family that he doesn't let show very easily. And that kind of like really
he lets
won me
it
over with
show,
him.
but it's usually like in action. The reason he is so aggressive all the time is because he's like all in for No Peak, all in for the Call family. Anything against that is like and that's why he doesn't get along with Shay. It's like, you went off and you left the family. How dare you? He's just like, you need to feel this like I do.
Yeah.
I mean, not only was it not predictable that Lan would die immediately, you know, even if I thought, okay, eventually Lan might die by the end of the book, I could see that happening. And then that would mean that Hilo would have to step into his shoes. Even so, it wasn't a situation where I'm just like, okay, waiting for that to happen. And like, obviously Hilo's going to take over and he's like going to be great. No, when Lan dies and Hilo has to take over, I felt just as shaky and anxious about that too. He's like, I'm not good at this though. Like, I was good in the role that I was in. That's what I'm good at. And I don't know how to do this. And you know I don't know how to do this. And I better have my sister here to help me because I hate you, but also you're good at other things that I'm not good at.
Yeah.
We got to pull this together because we're super fucked. Like, we can't pull it together.
Yeah. And I like that too. And I liked where we left Shay in terms of her taking a role within the family. I liked what it was saying about her approach to a male-dominated fantasy setting. And I liked the positioning of both Shay and Lady What's-Her-Face, the head of the other one, that it's not kick-ass girl bossery version of like sisters doing it for themselves. Like, it's not that. It's more like you have to fight and claw your way into your position. I liked how Shay did that.
I also just liked the idea of accounting being badass. I was like, yeah.
Well, my undergrad is in accounting, so you're not going to hear any objections
Exactly.
from me.
It's like, I like that it seems cool right now that you have a background in accounting and like that's going to be like gangsta. Let's
and
go.
I like they call that the weatherman. I thought that was like a fun.
Well, there's a lot of things like that, like the fist, the horn, the weatherman. Like, all the naming conventions in the universe really, really worked for me.
Yeah. Now, Bethany, what was it about Shay's position at the end that you did not like?
I guess I found it frustrating because her whole arc was the opposite of finding independence. And I don't know, like, I really liked her as a character for a lot of the book. And I liked her finding her own way in opposition to what her family was doing. And I think I was hoping that she would continue with that and do something interesting on the outside. And so I just didn't find it satisfying to have her like sucked back in. I don't know. I
was with Hilo. I was so angry. I was like, when she's standing there and being like, I don't need protection. Don't send guards. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? You stay away. Don't come back to this island if you don't want protection, if you don't be part of this family. Because as soon as you show up, it doesn't matter if you don't wear your jade. It doesn't matter if you say, I'm not part of this, because like everyone else is going to treat you as part of this and you will be a target. So like, stop it.
Yeah. I guess I could have gotten on board with her like leaving the family if she had really left the family. Yeah. Like if she had stayed away and maybe we had, again, I don't want to like rewrite Fonda Lee's.
Or even like having her connect with somebody from a different faction could have been interesting. I think I just
like a Romeo Juliet kind of situation.
Like that would have been interesting. That would have been interesting.
You mean betray No Peak?
Yeah.
Like the pedophile did?
The pedophile was awful. Look, I don't know. Well, and they let that go on. I don't know. I think that's part of the problem.
I understand that. I really did not understand that.
I did understand it. I feel like I totally buy it because he's the BFF of the like grandpa of the clan. He's grandfathered in. He's like was it Harvey Weinstein? You're just like, everyone knows he's doing it. What are you gonna do about it?
Yeah, I guess it didn't feel to me like the book took it as seriously as I maybe wanted it to. Also,
I felt like that was a weird element to add because like he's kind of detestable enough without it.
Yeah,
and I don't know. I wasn't sold that was like an interesting thing to do with the character or like an interesting thing to introduce into the equation. It was shitty enough that he gets when he gets Lon killed, right?
I think it made me even like everybody else less because they all just sort of kept making space for him to do that, and everybody knew he was doing it, and I was like, "I already don't really like y'all, and y'all are doing that, like, no, why am I rooting for you? Like, why should I care whether you guys are the winners here? Y'all suck."
I guess
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen
Yeah.
enough gangster stories where there's not the main character, but like one of the main group. There's somebody who's got like a weird thing going on. They just turn a blind eye to it and they're like, try to keep an eye on it and try to make them not do whatever their thing is like too much, but like they do know it and they kind of like are like, okay, you're gonna do your things. It is what it is. So like I've seen that so often in gangster mafia type stories that I was like, yeah, this is a thing.
Yeah, I don't really watch gangster mafia stories, so
Well, I guess I don't disagree with that. I think it's just, I don't know. I didn't fully buy that piece of the story in general, that he would still be around. I get the internal logic of the book of why he was, but I guess I just wasn't sold that was wholly
You mean why he would still
convincing.
be weatherman after Lan took over?
Yeah, like I think especially given what he ends up doing, it seems like Lon was kind of clued into the way that winds were blowing. Weatherman pun.
I don't think
And
anyone thought that he would betray No Peak. You know, they're like, what's he up to? That
I
he's
thought
like
that
that he was very much grandpa's man, and so he's like undermining Lan because he doesn't trust Lan to actually be Pillar, but that not that he would betray No Peak.
right, but I mean, I don't get why Lan has him around. Like he's undermining him, even if it is with Grandpa. And I guess I just didn't.
I guess it because I mean a lot of what this book is doing also so right is like they're criminals obviously and they're all like there's people that are not part of the family that are part of No Peak but everyone who's in charge this is family and so in addition to the politics of running a gang it's the politics of family and the fact that Grandpa and the weatherman would have been authority figures in all of their lives growing up. They were in charge. They are what they say goes in No Peak. And that Lan having to step into these shoes and having to like be Pillar now when Grandpa doesn't really act like you are. And he's always been an authority figure. And that's hard to shake that. And that like the weatherman is now your number two. And like he's always been the person you answer to. So to now be his boss would be understandably you can't like
Weird,
make
but
that
I
leap
mean,
until
I guess I just felt like,
to do it though.
yeah.
I don't know.
And
I
I
mean,
don't
he
know,
was
maybe
groomed
I
to
just
do it, but
didn't.
even then, Grandpa was like, "Yeah, but you're not really in charge."
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that, I mean, I liked, building on what I was saying about in the non-spoiler section, I did like that as a theme, because to me, and maybe I'm just overreading, but like to me, it felt like the entirety of how millennials and boomers are kind of going head to head in terms of boomers have not set millennials up for success and will not let go to allow millennials to try to make things better. Like within economics, but also like socially, politically, etc. I liked that as a theme, at least here in the US. You know, we have 80-year-olds who are still running our politics and like making the rules and benefiting from, you know, holding on to all the generational wealth, etc. So like I liked that as a conflict that Grandpa has like turned it over to Lon, but because he never actually really does in some ways, I don't think Weatherman Dude would have done what he did if Grandpa had actually really turned it over to Lon and like really said, like, yes, you are
that's
in
what I
charge
said. Like,
now.
if Grandpa really had genuinely, truly, and utterly turned it over to Lan, Lan would have had a different weatherman. But it's
Yeah,
like
exactly.
leaving your man in charge to keep an eye on Junior to make sure that the ship is running smooth. Because like Junior's in charge, but like really, I'm leaving my guy to be weatherman to be really in charge.
Yeah.
But I like
And
that
then-
as a theme, and I like that he has to, I mean, not that I wanted Lon to die, but I did take savage delight in when Grandpa was mourning and be like, yeah, this is your fault, asshole.
Like I said before, like you have to like Hilo. And like I've said before, the books like this, and in plenty of books, I am not on board, where books are like, you have to agree that this is clever. You have to agree that this is badass. If you don't also feel that way, then this is not going to work for you. And so then like, again, like in Jade City, when Lan dies and Hilo is like melodramatically screaming to the heavens that he will have revenge, I'm like, yeah, you get them because they killed Lan. Go to war, kill them all.
Dirty apes. Yeah.
See, and that's where like the gangster thing just doesn't work for me, because I'm just like, what are you really standing for? Really? What do you expect? Like y'all are doing terrible things to each other all the time.
Well,
I don't know. I
Live
just
by
like
the sword, die by the sword. I don't care
but
about
it's
any
interesting
of you.
that they are like an acknowledged part basically of like political and bureaucratic structure. Like it's not just like hush deals with gangsters, like they are an established part of
It's
how
like
that all
Tammany
works.
Hall realness. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's exactly the thing, is this is why these kinds of stories don't work for me, I think, is that, like, I'm just not it's harder for me, I think, to really root for the characters. I don't know.
Man,
Unless
I
I
did real
really love
I
them.
I
Hmm?
felt very bad for the owner of the Twice Lucky. I was like, that poor guy.
Yeah.
I feel very bad for most of the people who live in this city,
Honestly,
as
it
I would
sucks
for
for
any city
everybody.
run by. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a good place to live.
That's why you joined the gang, for your own
Yeah,
protection.
but then that can be dangerous too. I don't know. It's just
Well, I'm not saying that like gangs are great. I'm saying that like that's how that keeps happening. When people are like, why can't we end it? It's because, okay, if you want to end the gangs, they both harm and protect their communities. So if you
Mhm.
get rid of the gang, okay, you better replace it with something, because they are an essential part of how this community functions, for better or for worse. They are
Mhm.
doing equal parts good and bad. You better provide social services, because basically gangs provide social services.
Yeah. Yep.
So this is the chapter 3 podcast endorsement of the need for a social safety net.
I thought you were going to say endorsement of gangs.
No.
No.
I was like, oh, that's not the point I was trying to make.
No, Leanna's saying you have to have a social safety net or else it will be gangs. So
Or
that's
else it will be
basically
gangs,
the
right?
threat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, like literally, yeah. That's why we
Yeah.
have them.
Okay.
Well, and, like,
Also,
mean,
I
yeah.
do have to say, and people don't agree with me. I know, because I've heard that people don't agree with me. I thought that the sex scene was awkward.
With Hilo
Apparently, there are
and
people who like were into it, and I was like, "Hmm."
It wasn't premium. It wasn't like smut, but
Yeah.
it was. I thought for a fantasy sex scene, it was actually pretty good.
I didn't feel
I
any
didn't
kind
think it
of
was
way
like
about it.
romantic.
I mean, again, it's like watching a sex scene in a gangster type TV or movie. Like, it's not like watching Outlander, which is clearly for, ribbed for her pleasure. It's
Yeah.
just, oh, these gangsters also have sex. So like that is also a thing that is being depicted.
You know what I think it is when I read it, there were other people reading it at the same time, were really apparently into that, and I was like, "You need to read some romance." Like,
I was
because
gonna
I was like,
say
I just
maybe I can give them some mafia romance recommendations. If
maybe,
maybe
maybe.
this like unlocks something for them.
Look, I mean, honestly, it might.
Yeah.
I just thought it was funny because it was,
I
and
was
maybe
hoping
that's
what
part of
happened
it
with
is
me.
because I do read. Yeah. Well, no, it didn't. Not maybe no, but I just thought it was funny because like when I was reading it, there were other people who were reviewing it and talking about like, ooh, how like steamy that scene was, and I was like, okay.
I mean, unless it was like a menage with the swords crossing, I'm not gonna really remember it too much. So
But the sex scene does like neatly segue us to Hilo's girlfriend, then later wife, who I think is a great character.
I really liked her. Yeah.
She was
And it's
really
another
interesting.
thing. So many things, like I said at the beginning of Jade City, I was like, okay, and Hilo's got his chick, he's got his old lady, like of course he does. And she seems pretty, so like that's fine. And her brothers, work for Hilo in the No Peak clan. Yep, this all checks
Tweedledee
out.
and Tweedledum. Yeah.
Yeah, and then like when she turns out to be a much more complicated, interesting character, just like everything in the book seems to gradually become complicated and interesting. I was like, oh, I underestimated you. I am sorry, my lady. Like that is, you are more than what you appear.
Yeah.
And again,
she
like I
did
know
end
that
up being
Bethany
interesting.
didn't like Shay's plotline, but then I feel like you probably did like Hilo's.
I did like hers. Yeah, like his girlfriend or whoever she was. Yeah, I thought she was interesting.
And the fact that, again, this is one of those things that isn't paid off in this book, but I'm sure that it will be something in future books. They're all like, we can't tell Hilo what we're up to. And Hilo's going to find out. He's not going to be happy about it.
Yep.
Yeah. We'll see. I don't know. Have you guys seen the Godfather movies?
No.
Yeah.
Okay. I do think it's interesting in the sense of how things develop over time. So, now that we can talk about spoilers. So what I understand is that the next book takes place over like 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Which I think is interesting because this book is a very focused timeline.
It's a very short.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that we're going to get a la The Godfather, babies being born and people living and dying and like, the progress of time and how that just time changes dynamics. I do think that will be interesting, for instance, with Wynn. Okay, when she becomes the mother of his children, like how does that change her position within the clan and like how does that change her
it's also
relationship
going to
him? And
considering she's a Stone Eye, it's going to be really critical what their children end up being if they have children.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it seems like that's kind of part of the gig, right?
Which again, like we haven't really at all talked about how Jade works and how the drugs work. And I think a lot of that again became more complicated and interesting, like the introduction of stone eyes as a thing and the way that it's a very genetic kind of magic system. Not everyone can use Jade, and it's not because it's very, very different, the kind of thing from like a book where there's like some chosen born magic users and some people, like you were born a wizard. Like, isn't that great? Like, this is it's, a cultural heritage that you are able to use Jade. And so then they have a monopoly on Jade and Jade use, and the introduction of the drugs that enable you to use Jade when you aren't born with that ability as like a democratization of access to Jade. But also there are big side effects to that, and it being used on the streets as like a street drug, which is like, okay, that's not good. And then also I'm rooting for No Peak, and No Peak has a vested interest in keeping a monopoly on Jade and Jade use, and all the Green Bones do. So like they wouldn't want everyone having access to Jade. So all of that becomes so much more nuanced and complicated.
Yeah, I mean, it would be an interesting turn of events if like his heir apparent ends up not.
And another, I mean, like we have, it's being teased and set up, but it's not really like yet a thing that like nations outside of where we are getting Jade and getting this drug that enables them to use Jade. And you're like, okay, that's gonna be, the next book's literally called Jade Wars. So
yeah,
I have to think.
Well, I mean, it's very similar to like the Opium Wars in some ways, right? Like, because it seems like it's drawing some on that history and the way that like Jade is mirroring addiction and like the different uses. Like, so I feel like that's probably a lot of where all that's coming from.
Yeah, that seems to be an influence. It'll be interesting to see how that's handled in contrast to something like the Poppy War that is very directly, I mean, both of them, I guess, are dealing with some of the same themes.
Yeah.
But so like the way that it's not, so much like, I mean, addiction is part of it, but the fact that with opium, there is no upside. Like there's no reason to use
if you're
opium.
having surgery and that's the only way to.
Right. But I mean, like it's not a military strength. Like there's no reason why you would want to acquire this as a defense for your country or as like a gang weapon. And so the fact that like for the money powers you.
Or you use it to, I mean, like, isn't that a whole part of the Opium Wars? Is that the British like purposefully encourage people to get addicted to it so that they could then
right? But that's like a very different thing from getting it to use it yourself to make yourself stronger. And so then that's where that dichotomy of like, if I use this, I can defeat my enemies, but if I use this, I'm hurting myself. And so then like it isn't just, usually when we talk about drug use, you're like, why are you doing this to yourself? You're only hurting yourself. This is breaking you down. And there's no reason to be doing this to yourself because it's hurting you. Versus with Jade, you're doing this because it's going to make you strong and powerful and be able to defend people that you love. Also, you're a little addicted to it. So,
yeah. Interesting. Well, you guys will have to let me know how the rest of the series goes.
When I'm screaming about it on my Insta stories, you'll know that I've started Jade War.
Yeah.
Liene, are you gonna like dive in ASAP to the next book?
I was hoping next month.
Go for it.
Exciting.
I won't be reading it with you because I'm not ready yet, but you should go for it. Okay. I'm sorry. I'll be reading Hop with you, so we'll have something to read together.
And then as I'm excited reading Jade War, I'll be like, okay, Mar, but like read it soon because like what stuff that's happening, and you'll be like, okay, I need to read it so I can find out all these juicy things.
It's like, do you want me to read this or do you want me to read Before They Are Hanged? Sophie's choice. Leanna's choice.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Before They Are Hanged, but like
okay.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I would like to have my cake and eat it too, please.
Well, we're living in late stage capitalism. There's none of that.
Well, so hopefully this helped people figure out maybe if they want to read it themselves or some conversation if you've read it already. And we are going to move into On My Radar, where we're going to share recent or upcoming book releases in sci-fi, fantasy, and romance that we're excited about. Books for today's episode will be released between April 5th and April 18th, 2022, with the exception of any guest recommendations that can be anything recent or upcoming. But first, if you enjoy the podcast, we'd appreciate if you take a moment to rate and review us so we can continue to reach more listeners. And if you're interested in getting early access to episodes as well as exclusive bonus content with every episode, consider supporting us on Patreon. Huge thanks to all of our supporting patrons, including our world-expanding patrons, Trina and Sarah. You all make what we do possible, so thank you. And I have 4 books to talk about.
I have 2.
Cool. Okay, so maybe I'll do a couple and then we can kind of alternate. So the first one is coming out April 5th, and I'm currently reading it and loving it. This is The Blood Trials by N.E. Davenport. It's a debut adult sci-fantasy, so it's sci-fi with magic elements that I would recommend for fans of Red Rising. I feel like people who are into that will probably like this. It's very action-packed and very fast-paced. It follows a young woman, she's in like her early 20s, in a brutal military training school to join these elite forces. And like a lot of their joining class will die by the end. And she is hiding the fact that she has magic. She's a woman and she's a minority, and a lot of people want her dead. And she's trying to survive and also figure out who assassinated her grandfather along the way. So, yeah,
She's a
it's
busy
great.
bee.
Yeah, very, very good. I'm enjoying that. And then one that I read that I think is interesting is Hotel Magnifique by Emily J. Taylor. It's a YA fantasy novel that has been pitched as similar to Caraval, which I think is overused, but in this case, I think is actually a good comparison. I think it has very similar vibes. It follows a girl who's kind of, I guess, trying to save her sister, where there's this magical hotel that will appear places and be gone for like a long time, and only people with a lot of money and good luck can get tickets, but they're hiring. And
Sounds like the Night
so
Circus.
yeah, it's been comped to that also. So she and her sister end up working inside the hotel, but there are dark layers to it that she slowly uncovers of the reality of
There
what's
always
happening.
are.
There always are within the hotel. So I really liked that one. Mara, if you want to share one, and then I've got a couple more.
So both of mine are just outside of the window, but like
Fine.
very close. So on the 19th, well, I'll go with my one that's like very anticipated. The 19th is Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse.
Yes.
Black Sun is one of my all-time favorite books. Leanna is dead to me because she's only May on it, so whatever. But Bethany, we're still cool.
Good to know.
But yeah, Favorite Star, I really loved it. I think that it's, if I'm trying to be objective, I don't think it's as good as the first one, but I personally still absolutely loved it. Had a great time.
Yeah.
Very excited for the next one. I think, Bethany, when we were talking about it, I agree. It's sort of like a resetting the chessboard kind of book.
But with
So,
a good version of it. Like it's
Yeah.
it's like an elevated version of a resetting the chessboard because it's got better world building and characterization. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I love the characters. I love that world. So I still had a great time. So that's one
Yeah.
that I'm reminding everyone to pre-order so that it does
Yes.
well and we
Mhm.
get more and more and more.
Mine is pre-ordered.
Good. Me too.
So one that I'm kind of interested in, I know this author is popular, but I haven't read anything from her before. April 5th, we're getting Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, who wrote Station 11. So she's got a new book coming out. It says it's a novel of art, time, love, and plague that takes the reader from Vancouver Island in 1912 to a dark colony on the moon 300 years later, unfurling a story of humanity across centuries and space. So it's got a pretty cover. It sounds interesting. Might give it a try.
I lived in Vancouver for 3 years, so that makes me like, I didn't realize that there was that connection.
Oh, interesting.
So maybe I'll be enticed to pick it up because it's hard. It's actually very hard to find books that are set in Canada in general, but then specifically Vancouver. Because like I was trying to do that when I lived there, and there's not that many.
Oh, that's interesting.
Have you read Zero Repeat Forever?
Mm-mm.
Because that's Canadian.
Okay.
I can think of a couple. I can think of couple set in Toronto.
Yeah, if they're in Canada, it's usually in Toronto or Quebec. But yeah, it's harder than you think. So Canadian listeners, drop your Canadian, have some Maple Leaf pride. Drop your X in the comments.
Yes, there you go. And then my last one I have is coming out April 12th. It's a horror novella called And Then I Woke Up by Malcolm Devlin. I just read an e-arc of this one. It's really interesting. It's kind of slightly more literary take on horror. Thematically, what it's about is false narratives and like the things that people believe and charismatic people convincing them to believe things and like what's true and what's not and what's real and what's not, which I think is really interesting today. But the story is told from this guy who maybe lived through a zombie apocalypse, or did he? Because there was a moment where there were people who saw their fellow humans turning into zombies and attack each other, and they went and survived. But maybe that never happened, and maybe there's a cure that can help them see the world as it really is. Who knows? Anyway, it's a really interesting little novella that's like playing with some ideas that I think feel very timely.
Is that a Tor one?
It's a Tor.com one, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds like them.
Yeah.
I have one more. Well, I'll give like an honorary recommendation that I'm sure between now and April 18th, there will be another Mink book released on Kindle Unlimited. So if you like today's episode and you're like, I would like to read some very problematic, smutty mafia romance, Mink is my go-to for that. There's always cats in her books, like adorable kitties. Everybody is very stupid, but horny. So if you want a lighthearted mafia romance, is how I would describe these. Mink is who I'd recommend. So I'm sure she'll have a release between now and mid-April. But my actual last anticipated one is Go Hex Yourself by Jessica Clare. I'm again hyping this up because I really want there to be pre-orders so that there will be more in the series. So selfishly, I'm hoping people will read this, but it is a paranormal romance. Jessica Clare writes in pretty much all genres. Her other pen name is Ruby Dixon. So Ice Planet Barbarian fame. And this one is with a witch and a warlock. And it's a kind of like hate to love rom-com type vibe. So it's like a lighthearted paranormal. This is not like Twilight angsting. This is more, adults banging it out at the bottom of a well when they're looking for a magical object kind of a vibe. They are also kind of stupid, but in a fun, lovable way. Mm-hmm. Ruby Dixon writes a lot of himbos, and so does Jessica Clare, which I'm all for. So anyway, that comes out on the 19th.
Sounds fun.
It can be something that already came out like recently, right?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
We're just recommending books. Go for it.
Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky is a novella that came out recently on March 15th. And it's a world in which there are ogres that are real and big. And the main character's landlord is an ogre. Yeah.
Love it.
Interesting. That's fun. Awesome.
If you would like to read the smutty version of that, it's Girls Weekend by C.M. Nacosta, who is the author of Morning Glory Milking Farm. So,
which has been mentioned on this podcast before by Izzy. So
there you go.
Yeah, I love it.
So, Lena, when you're done reading that like serious version,
you can read the erotic version.
Oh, yeah, I thought you were going to say when I'm done reading Morning Glory Milking Farm, then I have more joy awaits.
Also that. Like
that
after
too.
you read and love Morning Glory Milking Farm, as I know you will in July.
Of course.
Wait, there's more.
There's more to be had. She also has one with a bug man, a spider man. Not like Peter Parker, like a man, like a half spider. Half
I had hope there for a second.
Would you really want to read a paranormal romance with Peter Parker?
I mean, arguably any romantic story with Spider-Man is a paranormal romance because the idea that a radioactive spider bit him, I think it's pretty paranormal.
Yeah, I guess. That's true.
That's true. Well, all of those will be linked in the show notes or in the video description if you're watching us on YouTube. Mara, thanks for joining us today. This was fun.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Again, this has been Chapter 3 Podcast. We're your hosts, Bethany and Liene. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Chapter 3 Podcast. And you can also find us on our individual YouTube channels, which will be linked in the show notes or the video description if you're watching us on YouTube. The next episode will be available in 2 weeks, and we will be back to talk about Bridgerton season 2. So look forward to that. It's gonna be fun. And this episode's bonus content will be available to patrons in the next few days. Thanks for listening.